My husband asked for a divorce and wanted to keep everything: the bar, the truck, the accounts, all of it. He said I was just a little accounting clerk who never contributed anything. My lawyer begged me to fight. I said, give him everything. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My mother cried. My sister called screaming. My father, he didn't say a word. He just drove 4 hours to Raleigh and waited outside the courthouse. My husband didn't know why my father was waiting. He didn't know who else was waiting. At the final hearing, I signed over everything. He smiled. Then he walked out the door, and that smile was the last one he'd have for a very, very long time. My name is Sloan, and this is my story. If you're listening, hit subscribe and stay. You don't want to miss what happens next. The first thing Kyle ever cooked for me was burnt scrambled eggs on a Sunday morning in his studio apartment, and I thought, this man is trying. That was enough back then. Trying was enough. I was 27, 3 years into a job as an accounting clerk at Coastal Heritage Bank in Greenville, South Carolina. The kind of job where you reconcile numbers all day and nobody notices until a number is wrong. I was good at it. I liked the quiet certainty of a balanced ledger, the way columns either added up or they didn't. No opinions, no arguments, just math. Kyle was 31, bartending at a place downtown, talking to anyone who'd listen about the bar he was going to open someday. He had floor plans drawn on napkins. Literally. Our first date was at a Waffle House at 1 in the morning after his shift, and he spread a paper napkin flat on the table between our coffee cups and sketched a layout with a pen he'd borrowed from the waitress. VIP section here. Dance floor here. Bar shaped like an L so the bartender can see every corner of the room. I looked at this man with ink on his fingers and hot sauce on his sleeve, drawing his future on a napkin in a Waffle House at 1 in the morning, and I thought, he has a dream. He just needs someone to believe in him. That was my first mistake. Not believing in him. Believing that my belief was what he actually needed. We got married 14 months later. Small ceremony, backyard of my parents' house in Greenville. My father shook Kyle's hand at the reception and said, "Take care of my girl." Kyle said, "Yes, sir." I remember my father's face after that handshake. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at me across the yard with an expression I couldn't read then, but can read perfectly now. It said, "I hope you're right about this one, baby, but I don't think you are." My dad, Walter Merritt, has owned Merritt Auto Repair on Augusta Road for 31 years. He's not a man who gives speeches. He communicates through brake jobs and oil changes, and showing up at your house with a toolbox when something needs fixing. My mom, Jean, has been his office manager since before I was born. They're not rich. They're the other thing, the thing that's harder. They worked for 40 years. Paid off the mortgage, put 2 daughters through state college, and saved enough that they could breathe. Comfortable isn't glamorous, but it doesn't keep you up at night either. When I was 26, my parents gave me a down payment on a condo. $65,000. My dad handed me the check at the kitchen table and said one thing: "This is yours." I paid the mortgage for 3 years, built up about $185,000 in equity. It was small. It was mine, and it was the first place I'd ever lived where every wall color was a choice I made myself. Kyle saw the condo differently. He saw startup capital. 1 year, Sloan, he said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table 6 months after the wedding. 1 year, and we'll buy a house twice this size. I just need us to go all in. I sold the condo. Every dollar went into his first bar, Slate and Barrel, on Glenwood South in Raleigh. We moved 4 hours from my parents for his dream. I quit the bank. Kyle said he needed me on the books. Slate and Barrel lasted 14 months. The location was wrong, the rent was brutal, and Kyle spent money like the profits were already coming when they weren't. He'd ordered top-shelf inventory for a bar that was half empty on Saturdays. He'd buy furniture he'd seen in a magazine. "You have to spend money to make money," he'd say, and I'd look at the spreadsheets and think, not this much. Not this fast. When it closed, Kyle sat at our kitchen table in the apartment we'd downgraded to and said, "I need the car." I drove a Honda Accord. Paid off. Worth about $22,000. I sold it. Kyle used the money to cover the last of the lease penalties and outstanding vendor bills. I rode my bike to the grocery store for 3 months before I bought a used Civic from a coworker's daughter for $8,500. It pulled slightly to the left, and the AC took 10 minutes to kick in, but it was mine. Then came Marcus Hale. Kyle met him at some networking event. Marcus 40 Smooth owned 2 bars in Charlotte that were supposedly thriving. Marcus had a plan, a new concept, a warehouse space off Capitol Boulevard he could get cheap. All he needed was a partner with energy and a little bit of capital. 120,000, Kyle said. Marcus has the connections, the experience. This time will be different. He wanted me to ask my father. I called. My dad listened to the whole pitch without interrupting. 11 seconds of silence after I finished. Then one word. No. He didn't explain. He didn't argue. He didn't say Kyle was a bad bet, or the numbers didn't work, or the last bar had failed. Just no, spoken the same way he'd tell a customer their transmission was shot. Not cruel, not emotional, just the way things were. Kyle and I fought that night, the first time he ever raised his voice. Your dad thinks I'm a loser. You think that too. I didn't think that. I still believed in the napkin. I still believed in trying. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was low the way it gets when my father is in the next room. Don't tell your father, I'll wire it tomorrow. $120,000 from my parents' savings, the money my mother had spent 40 years helping to build. I cried when I saw the deposit hit. Not because I was relieved, because I knew what my mother was doing choosing her daughter over her husband's judgment. And I knew even then that my father's judgment was probably right. The second bar opened in June. Kyle named it Neon. By September, he was wearing a new watch I'd never seen a receipt for, and driving a truck that didn't show up on any bank statement I had access to. The money was coming from somewhere, and for the first time in our marriage, Kyle didn't want me anywhere near the books. I didn't ask where the money came from. I should have. Neon didn't look like a bar that was struggling. That was the first thing that should have told me something. The sign out front pulsed blue and pink against the brick facade visible from 2 blocks away. Inside, Kyle had installed the VIP section he'd been sketching on napkins for years. Velvet rope leather booths, a sound system that cost more than our apartment's annual rent. Marcus had connections with promoters, DJs, influencers, who'd post a story in exchange for free drinks. Within 3 months, Neon was the place in North Raleigh on a Friday night. Kyle changed with it. New clothes, not the Target button-downs he used to wear, but fitted shirts I didn't recognize from any store I'd ever been inside. A haircut every 2 weeks at a place that charged $60. Cologne I hadn't picked out. He started saying things like building the brand and curating the experience, and talking about Marcus like Marcus was a genius, instead of a guy who owned 2 bars in Charlotte that I'd never actually verified were profitable. I wasn't on the books anymore. Kyle said the accountant Marcus recommended was handling everything. You did great with Slate and Barrel, he told me, but this is a bigger operation. We need a professional. A professional. I'd been reconciling accounts since I was 24. But sure. So I stayed home. Cooked dinner Kyle didn't come back for. Watched the 11 o'clock news in an apartment where the rent was $1,400 a month and the kitchen faucet dripped every 6 seconds. I counted once. The small things started adding up the way small things do, not all at once, but in a pile you don't notice until it's tall enough to block the light. Kyle changed his phone password. He used to unlock it in front of me without thinking. Now it stayed face down on the counter and his hand would drift toward it if I walked too close. He stopped wanting me at the bar. It's a construction zone, babe, not your scene. He started showering before bed, which he never used to do after a shift. He'd just collapse on the couch smelling like bourbon and floor cleaner. Now he came home scrubbed clean, like he was washing something off before he got to me. I noticed a charge on the credit card statement. $2,800. David Yerman, the jewelry store at Crabtree Valley Mall. I knew the name because I'd walked past it once and looked at a bracelet in the window that cost more than my car payment. Client gift, Kyle said when I asked. VIP, cost of doing business. I nodded, but the nod was slower than it should have been, and something in my chest shifted. Not broke, not yet. Just shifted the way a foundation cracks before the wall falls. On a Thursday in October, Kyle left his allergy medication on the kitchen counter. Cetirizine, the generic brand, because even men who spend $2,800 on jewelry for clients still buy off-brand Zyrtec. He'd been sneezing all week. I knew he'd need it for his Friday. I drove to Neon at 10:30. The parking lot was full. Bass thumped through the walls. I walked in, and a bartender I half recognized nodded at me. "Kyle's in the office," he said, already turning back to the taps. The hallway behind the bar smelled like bleach and something sweet I couldn't name. Storage room on the left, walk-in cooler humming on the right, office at the end. The door was open about 4 inches. Enough. She was sitting on his desk, legs crossed. Black dress that ended mid-thigh. Around her neck was a pendant gold chain, single stone, and I recognized it immediately because I'd stared at the credit card charge for $2,800 and tried to imagine what a client gift looked like. Now I knew. Kyle stood between her knees, one hand on her waist, leaning in like he was telling her a secret. She laughed, head tipped back. Throat exposed, the kind of laugh you only give someone when you've stopped pretending you're just co-workers. Kyle laughed too. Not the laugh I knew. Not the polite one he used at dinner parties or the forced one he gave my father's jokes. This one was loose. Easy. The laugh of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. I stepped back. Set the allergy pills on the bar counter by the register. Walked out. Nobody saw me come. Nobody saw me leave. I sat in my Civic in the parking lot for 47 minutes. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. Knuckles white. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe because the tears were behind something harder that hadn't cracked open yet. Her name was Tanya Voss, 29. Head bartender at Neon, according to her LinkedIn, though I'd never seen her pour a drink. Her Instagram told a different story than a bartender's salary would support restaurants with cloth napkins, shopping bags from stores I'd never been inside, nails that cost more per session than my weekly groceries. One photo showed her hand holding a cocktail glass, and on her wrist was an Apple Watch that Kyle had told me was a gift for the bar manager. I spent 2 weeks looking, not obsessively, methodically. The way I used to trace a discrepancy through 6 months of bank statements until I found the 17 cents that didn't belong. Every client gift on the credit card had a match. The David Yerman pendant, the Apple Watch, a Lululemon charge, a Sephora charge, a recurring charge at a nail salon on Falls of Neuse. Kyle was running a second household on the business account, and he'd labeled every expense with words like marketing and client relations and staff incentive. Then I found the apartment, a lease agreement in Kyle's name, downtown Raleigh, $1,850 a month. Signed 4 months ago, the same month he'd told me we couldn't afford to move out of our apartment yet. 1 more year, babe, we're almost there. 1 more year in a leaking apartment while he furnished a downtown 1-bedroom for a woman who called herself a bartender. But the thing that broke me, the thing that turned the crack in my chest into something wide enough to fall through, was the wire transfer. $45,000. Audi dealership on Capitol Boulevard. I checked Tanya's Instagram that night, and there it was posted 2 days earlier. A white Audi Q5 gleaming in a parking garage. Caption, Blessed new chapter energy. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, walked to the window, looked down at the parking lot where my Civic sat under a streetlight. $8,500 bought from a coworker's daughter pulls to the left. AC takes 10 minutes. Purchased with my own money because I didn't want to ask my mother for another cent. $45,000 for her car, $8,500 for mine, and both paid for with money that started as my family's. I could have screamed, could have driven to that bar and made a scene he'd never forget. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the bar's quarterly financial reports Kyle had shared with me back when he still pretended I was part of the operation, and started reading them the way I used to read bank ledgers, line by line, number by number, looking for the thing that didn't belong. I found it in 11 minutes. Numbers don't lie. People do constantly, creatively, and with great enthusiasm, but numbers sit still and tell you exactly what happened if you know how to read them. I read them. Neon's quarterly report showed gross revenue of $38,000 a month, respectable for a bar that size in that part of Raleigh. Not great, not terrible. After expenses, rent, inventory, payroll, utilities, insurance, Marcus's management fee, the net was maybe $9,000. Enough to keep the lights on. Not enough to explain Kyle's new wardrobe, Tanya's Audi, a downtown apartment, and a lifestyle that looked like it cost $15,000 a month before breakfast. The math didn't work. $9,000 in profit does not produce $45,000 cars and $2,800 necklaces and $1,850 a month apartments. Either Kyle had a second income I didn't know about, or the revenue number on that report was a lie. I still had access to the joint checking account Kyle used for what he called business overhead. He'd never removed me. Probably forgot I was on it the way you forget about a piece of furniture that's been in the same corner so long it becomes invisible. I logged in at 1 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table in the glow of my laptop, and pulled 6 months of statements. The deposits told the story. Cash deposits always, and always just under $10,000. $9,000 even. $8,500. $9,200. $9,300. Never once crossing the threshold. Any person who's spent a week in banking knows what that pattern means. It has a name. Structuring. Deliberately breaking cash deposits into amounts below the federal reporting limit to avoid triggering a currency transaction report. Banks are required to flag any cash transaction over $10,000, so if you want to move large amounts of cash without anyone noticing, you keep each deposit at 9 something and hope nobody looks too closely. Somebody was moving money through Neon that had nothing to do with cocktail sales. I closed the laptop. Sat in the dark for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The faucet dripped. Outside, a car passed with its bass too loud, shaking the window in its frame. I knew what I was looking at. I didn't want to know, but I knew. 3 years of banking had taught me to recognize dirty money the way a mechanic recognizes a bad engine you don't need to take it apart. You can hear it. My husband was laundering cash through his bar, the bar my mother's savings had built. For 3 days, I did nothing. I went to the grocery store. I cleaned the apartment. I cooked dinner Kyle didn't come home for. I lay in bed at night and stared at the ceiling and ran calculations in my head like I was still sitting at my desk at Coastal Heritage, except the account I was auditing was my own life. The math kept coming out the same way. If I told Kyle, I knew he'd deny it. He'd explain it away. He'd call me paranoid, remind me I wasn't a real accountant, tell me I didn't understand how the bar business worked. And if that didn't work, he'd get angry. Or worse, he'd get scared. Scared men do desperate things, and my name was still on that joint account. Every structured deposit had flowed through an account with Sloan Merritt on the signature card. If I went to the police, I'd be the wife who knew. How long had I had access months? How many deposits had come through while my name was on the account? Dozens. I could already hear the prosecutor, and you never noticed Mrs. Merritt. An accounting clerk who reconciled bank statements for a living never noticed. Her husband was structuring cash deposits. But if I stayed silent, if I kept my mouth shut and looked the other way, then I was choosing to be part of it. Every day I said nothing was another day I was complicit. Another day the money my mother had hidden from my father was sitting underneath a drug operation, like a foundation poured in someone else's name. I picked up the phone on the third night and called my sister. Nadia is 2 years older than me, teaches fourth grade in Greenville, and has never in her life had a problem she couldn't solve by making a list and calling the right person. She answered on the second ring. I could hear her kids in the background bath time. I need a lawyer, I said. Not a divorce lawyer, a criminal one. 3 seconds of silence. Then the bath time sounds got quieter, like she'd walked into another room and closed a door. Tell me. Not on the phone. Can you get me a name? Priya Shah. She was in my sorority at Clemson. She does white-collar defense now, federal cases, financial crimes. She's in Columbia, but she'll drive to Raleigh for the right situation. Nadia paused. Sloan, are you safe? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. I know. I'll call you after I talk to her. Priya Shah was 46, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and ordered black coffee like it was a personal philosophy. We met at a cafe off Hillsborough Street on a Tuesday morning. I brought a manila folder with 6 months of bank statements highlighted in 3 colors. Yellow for structured deposits, blue for unexplained withdrawals, pink for transfers to accounts I couldn't identify. She read for 20 minutes without speaking, turned pages with one finger, took her glasses off twice to rub her eyes. When she looked up, her expression was the one I imagined surgeons wear when they've opened someone up and found more than they expected. How long have you known? 2 weeks. Does he know you know? No. Good, keep it that way. She set the folder down. Here's where you stand. You're on the joint account, which means your name is technically on the instrument being used for structuring. That's a federal offense. But, she raised a finger before my stomach finished dropping. You didn't make the deposits. You didn't know about them until 2 weeks ago. And you're sitting in front of me right now, which means you're not hiding. You're disclosing. What do I do? Right now you're standing in a burning building. We need to get you out before we call the fire department. She laid it out. Step 1, document everything. Print statements, screenshot the cloud accounts, preserve the evidence chain. Step 2, separate my finances, completely close any access to accounts connected to Kyle's business. Step 3, when the time was right, cooperate with federal authorities, willingly, proactively, with counsel present. If you come to them before they come to you, Priya said, you're a witness. If they come to you first, you're a suspect. Timing is everything. I nodded. I understood timing. I'd spent 5 years waiting for Kyle's dreams to come true. I could wait a little longer for the right moment to end them. Priya asked one more question before I left. The money your mother gave you, the $120,000, is there any way to trace where it went? I knew the answer. I'd already traced it. Every dollar of my mother's savings had flowed straight into the startup costs for Neon, the lease deposit, the renovation, the liquor license, the sound system. The same bar that was now washing drug money through its registers every week. My mother's retirement money bought the machine, and the machine was running on cocaine. My father is not a man who talks about his feelings. He talks about brake pads and transmission fluid, and whether Clemson's defensive line is going to hold up this season. But when he's worried about you, he drives 4 hours without calling first and shows up at your door with a toolbox and fixes something you didn't ask him to fix. He knocked on a Saturday morning. I opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt I'd slept in, holding a coffee mug with a chip on the rim, and there was Walter Merritt, 62 years old, Merritt Auto Repair Cap work boots, carrying a red Craftsman toolbox like he was making a house call. Just passing through Raleigh, he said. My father has never in his life just passed through anywhere. Greenville is 4 hours south. There is no version of any errand that takes you through Raleigh from Greenville. But I stepped aside and let him in because that's what you do when Walter Merritt shows up with a toolbox. You don't ask questions. You open the door. He fixed the kitchen faucet first, the one that dripped every 6 seconds. He'd brought the right washer, which meant he'd thought about this before he came, which meant my sister had called him, which meant he knew something. He didn't say what. He just lay on his back under my sink with a wrench and made the dripping stop for the first time in 9 months. Then the hallway light that flickered. Then the bathroom door that stuck. Then he went outside and checked my tire pressure and my oil and my windshield wipers, and came back in with his hands black to the wrists and said, "Your left front tire's low. I put air in it." We ordered pizza because my kitchen table barely fit 2 people, and cooking felt like too much effort for a conversation we both knew was coming. We sat on the floor of my living room with the box between us, paper towels for plates, and ate in silence for 3 slices. My father looked around the apartment the way you look at something that hurts, but you're not going to say so. He saw the secondhand couch, the coffee table with the water ring, the bedroom door open to a mattress on a frame with no headboard. He didn't comment, but I saw his jaw tighten, and I knew he was doing the same math I'd done 100 times his daughter used to own a condo. His $65,000 had bought her a front door with her name on the deed. Now she was eating pizza on the floor of a rental that cost $1,400 a month and smelled like the previous tenant's cat. "Kyle's been cheating on me," I said. No preamble, no easing into it. My father doesn't do preambles, so neither would I. Walter set his pizza down on the paper towel, looked at me. 15 seconds of silence I counted because counting is what I do when I'm trying not to fall apart. "What do you need?" Not, "I'll kill him." Not, "I told you so." Not, "How long," or "with who," or "Are you sure?" Just, "What do you need?" 4 words that held everything up like load-bearing walls. "I need you to trust me, Dad, and not do anything yet." He studied my face. I could see him fighting it, the part of him that wanted to drive to Neon and have a conversation with Kyle that involved fewer words and more of his hands. But he saw something in my expression that stopped him. Maybe he saw that his daughter wasn't broken. Maybe he saw that she was building something. "I trust you." He picked his pizza back up, took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "But Sloan, when it's time, I'm there." That was it. No speech. No 20 questions. My father said 9 words, and each one was a brick in a wall I could lean against. The following Tuesday, I met Priya for the second time. Her office this time, a small firm in a converted Victorian house near NC State law books on shelves that sagged in the middle, a fern in the window that was either thriving or dying depending on the light. She'd done her homework. Pulled public records on Marcus Hale's 2 Charlotte bars. One had been flagged by the state ABC Commission 2 years ago for inventory discrepancies, more liquor purchased than could be accounted for in sales. The investigation went nowhere, but the flag was there. Marcus knew how to walk close to lines. "You have 2 paths." Priya said, glasses on legal pad covered in her handwriting. "Path 1, file for divorce, now fight for your share of marital assets. But those assets are contaminated. Touching them puts you in proximity to the money laundering. Even if you're cleared, the association follows you. Background checks, bank applications, employment screenings. Dirty money leaves fingerprints on everyone who touches it, even the clean hands." She paused. "Path 2, let him make the first move. Let him file. Let him demand everything. Let him take the bar, the truck, the accounts, all of it. Once it's solely in his name, solely his liability, we hand the entire package to DEA with a bow on it. You walk away with nothing that's connected to him. Nothing they can seize. Nothing they can question. Path 2. You understand what that means. You walk out of your marriage with whatever's in your own name, which is an $8,500 Civic and about $3,200 in checking." Priya took her glasses off. "That's not a lot to start over with. It's clean, that's enough." She introduced me to Gail Lindstrom on a phone call that afternoon. 55 divorce attorney voice like gravel and zero tolerance for nonsense. Gail would handle the family court side. Priya would handle the federal side. 2 lawyers, 2 courtrooms, 1 exit. That evening, I came home to find Kyle on the couch, feet up, phone in hand, thumbs moving, smiling at something on the screen. He didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't ask where I'd been. Didn't notice the legal pad in my bag or the business cards in my wallet, or the fact that his wife had spent the afternoon building the architecture of his destruction. I set my keys on the counter, poured a glass of water, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and continued documenting quietly, carefully, one transaction at a time. Kyle laughed at something on his phone. The sound carried across our tiny apartment like it belonged to someone I used to know. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks later, Kyle came home early on a Wednesday, sober, serious, and carrying a folder. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, put the folder down, and said the only honest thing he'd said in 2 years. "I want a divorce." He brought a folder. Kyle Merritt, a man who couldn't remember to bring home milk, who forgot our anniversary twice, who once left his car running in a parking lot for 3 hours, brought a folder to ask for a divorce. Tabbed, color-coded. Someone had prepared him. Someone had told him exactly what to say and how to say it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd pitched me on Slate and Barrel, the same table where he'd asked me to sell my car, the same table where I'd cried after my mother wired $120,000 she'd hidden from my father and opened the folder like he was presenting a business proposal. "I think we both know this hasn't been working for a while," he said, rehearsed. I could almost see the script behind his eyes. "I want to do this the right way. Fair. Clean. Clean." That word again. He laid out his terms. He'd keep the bar, the truck, the business accounts, the LLC shares. I could keep whatever was in my name. "Whatever's in your name." He said it casually, like he was being generous. Like, whatever's in your name wasn't a used Civic and $3,200. Like 5 years of marriage hadn't started with a condo worth $185,000 and ended with a car that pulled to the left. I watched his face while he talked. He had the look of a man who'd practiced this in a mirror. Serious but not mean. Reasonable but firm. The face of someone who wanted you to believe this was hard for him too. Then he added something that wasn't in the folder. "There's something else." He shifted in his chair. Not nervous, more like someone about to deliver news they think is a gift. "Tanya's pregnant. I want to start fresh. For everyone." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. I heard my own heartbeat. Or maybe that was the faucet my father had fixed, some ghost drip still echoing in the pipes. Tanya was pregnant. The woman wearing my $2,800 necklace, driving a $45,000 car, living in an $1,850 a month apartment, all funded by a bar that washed cocaine money and was built with my mother's savings, was carrying my husband's child. And he wanted to start fresh. For everyone. I looked at Kyle. Really looked at him. Tried to find the man who'd drawn floor plans on a Waffle House napkin. The man who'd burned scrambled eggs and thought trying was enough. He wasn't there. Maybe he'd never been. "I'll think about it," I said. Kyle blinked. He'd expected tears. Or begging. Or at least a question, why or how long or don't you love me anymore. Something he could respond to with more rehearsed lines. My silence threw him. "Take your time." He managed and stood up and took his folder and walked out of the kitchen like a man who'd just closed a deal and wasn't sure why it felt incomplete. I sat at the table for 5 minutes after he left. Counted the seconds the way I count everything. 300 seconds of staring at the spot where his folder had been. Then I opened my laptop. I'd known about the structured deposits, known about the laundering, But I'd been reading the clean books, the version Kyle had shared with me back when I was still allowed near the numbers. The version that showed 38,000 a month and neat little line items for inventory and marketing. Now I needed the real ones. Kyle used the same password for everything, had since the day I met him. He thought it was clever because it had a number and a capital letter and an exclamation point. Neon 2021, the name of his bar and the year it opened. He used it for Netflix for his email for the cloud storage account he'd set up for business files. I knew because I'd watched him type it 100 times, and because I was the one who'd suggested he add the exclamation point when the site required a special character. Tanya's cloud access was linked to Kyle's account. He'd shared the folder with her the way a business partner shares a drive, full access, no restrictions. Everything she uploaded lived in a subfolder called NB Ops. I'd assumed NB stood for Neon Bar. Maybe it did. But the files inside had nothing to do with cocktail recipes. The real revenue spreadsheet opened like a window into a different world. Monthly gross through Neon, not 38,000, 155,000. 4 times the number on the clean books. Cash intake broken into categories with labels that read like code, house wine, appearing 43 times in 6 months, always in quantities that would have drowned every customer in the building. Private event supplies, delivered weekly to an address that wasn't the bar. Consulting payments to 3 phone numbers with no names attached routed through Venmo and Zelle in amounts just under reporting thresholds. Marcus Hale's name sat on every large transaction like a watermark. He approved shipments, he set prices, he managed the supply chain of whatever was flowing through Neon that wasn't bourbon. And Tanya. Tanya signed for deliveries. Tanya recorded quantities. Tanya maintained the spreadsheet with dates, amounts, sources, and distribution notes that would make a federal prosecutor weep with gratitude. At the bottom of the master document was a profit split formula. Kyle 40%, Marcus 45%, Tanya 15%, 15%. That's why Kyle chose her. Not because she was 29 and blonde and laughed with her head tipped back. Because she ran the operation. She was the bookkeeper, the real one. The one who tracked the money that actually mattered while I'd been handed the clean version and told I wasn't needed anymore. Kyle didn't love Tanya. Kyle needed Tanya. And Tanya didn't love Kyle. Tanya loved 15%. I printed everything. Every spreadsheet, every transaction log, every delivery receipt Tanya had scanned and uploaded. 3 copies. 1 on a USB drive I kept in my glove compartment. 1 emailed to Priya through the encrypted channel she'd set up. 1 printed on paper, 47 pages, double-sided, shipped to Greenville in a FedEx envelope, insured signature required. My father signed for it without opening it. I know because I tracked the delivery confirmation and then called him. You got it. Got it. Anything else? Not yet. Okay. 14 seconds. Our shortest call and our most important one. That evening, I called Priya from my car in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter engine running windows up. He asked for a divorce. He wants everything. Perfect. There's more. His girlfriend is pregnant. Silence on the line. I heard Priya shift in her chair. And she's not just his girlfriend. I continued. She's his bookkeeper. The real one. I found the actual revenue files. 4 years of drug money through that bar. My estimate based on the spreadsheets, 2 to 3 million, maybe more. Priya was quiet longer this time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Slower. Heavier. Sloan, this isn't family court anymore. This is federal. I know. Once we file a tip with DEA, there's no pulling it back. They investigate. They subpoena. They arrest. Your husband goes to prison. His partner goes to prison. Possibly the girlfriend. This becomes real in a way that doesn't unbecome real. I thought about the Audi in Tanya's Instagram story. Thought about my mother's voice on the phone. Don't tell your father. Thought about $120,000 that started as 40 years of my parents' work and ended as startup capital for a cocaine distribution ring. File the tip. That night, Kyle came home late, smelling like Tanya's perfume, something sweet and sharp, the kind that costs more per ounce than the wine I buy at Trader Joe's. He fell asleep on the couch with his phone unlocked on his chest screen, still glowing with a text thread I didn't need to read. I turned off the living room light, closed my bedroom door, lay in the dark, and listened to him snore. I didn't touch his phone. I didn't need to. I already had everything. What I needed now was patience, and I'd had 5 years of practice. The thing about filing a federal tip is that nothing happens right away. No sirens, no phone calls, no dramatic confirmation that someone received your information and is acting on it. You press send through your lawyer's secure channel, and then you go home and wash the dishes and fold the laundry and pretend your entire life isn't a grenade with the pin already pulled. 2 weeks passed. Kyle and I still shared the apartment, him on the couch most nights, me in the bedroom. We moved around each other like strangers in a hotel lobby, polite and careful, and never making eye contact for longer than a second. He was in a good mood. That was the strangest part. The divorce was moving forward. Sloan wasn't fighting. Everything was going according to his plan. He started being nice to me. Not real nice performance. Nice. The kind of nice that coats itself in generosity so it can feel good about what it's doing. He bought me coffee one morning, left it on the counter with a sticky note. Thought you could use this. K. He asked me how I was sleeping, whether I needed anything for the apartment, whether I'd found a lawyer yet. You should get a lawyer, he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen doorframe, arms crossed, voice gentle like a doctor delivering news. I want this to be fair, babe. I really do. Fair. From the man who'd taken my condo, my car, my mother's money, and built a cocaine operation on the foundation of everything I'd given him. Fair. I found someone, I said. She's handling it. Good. He smiled. Relieved. The smile of a man who thinks the game is over and he's won. I just want us both to be okay. He squeezed my shoulder as he walked past. The same shoulder, the same hand. And I stood in that kitchen and let him touch me and said nothing because I was 3 weeks away from the hearing, and the only thing between me and the other side of this was patience. Patience and the work I did every night after he left for the bar. My routine was precise. Kyle left for Neon around 7 most evenings. By 7:15, I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open and Tanya's cloud folder on screen. The password hadn't changed. Kyle was many things: charming, reckless, dishonest, but he was not a man who updated his passwords. Neon 2021 had carried him through 2 years of criminal enterprise, and he saw no reason to fix what wasn't broken. Every night I cross-referenced. Deposits against the clean books. Deposits against the real books. Cash flow in, cash flow out. I built a master spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, accounts, names, color-coded the way I used to color-code discrepancies at Coastal Heritage. Yellow for structured deposits. Blue for payments to unknown accounts. Pink for transfers that matched delivery dates in Tanya's logs. It was the most thorough accounting work I'd ever done, and nobody was paying me for it. I saved each night's work to 3 places: laptop, USB drive in the glove compartment, encrypted email to Priya. The paper copies were already in Greenville, locked in my father's safe between his business licenses and the title to his truck. Some women keep journals. I kept a prosecution file. On a Saturday night, 11 days before the hearing, Kyle came home early. I was at the kitchen table. The master spreadsheet was open on my screen, full color, every transaction from the last 6 months, mapped and annotated. I heard the key in the lock and my body went cold before my brain caught up. Hands moving before I could think, I slapped the laptop screen shut. Not closed the file, not minimized the window. Just killed the display and prayed the screen went dark fast enough. It did. Barely. Kyle walked in. Eyes red shirt untucked the sour sweet smell of whiskey and something else cologne, maybe. Tanya's perfume. Maybe both. He dropped his keys on the counter and looked at me. What are you doing up? Couldn't sleep. I stood moving to the sink, filling a glass of water to give my hands something to do. Paying bills. Electric went up again. He looked at the laptop. Closed on the table. His eyes stayed on it 1 beat longer than casual. 2 beats. I felt the seconds like voltage. Bills, huh? Duke Energy doesn't care if it's midnight. He held my gaze for another second. Then something in his face relaxed, not because he believed me, but because he decided it didn't matter. I was the accounting clerk, the woman who paid bills and reconciled statements and kept things running. Of course I was up late with a spreadsheet. That's all I was good for. He went to the bathroom. I heard the faucet, the toilet, the faucet again. I opened the laptop with shaking hands and closed every window, cleared the browser. History emptied the downloads folder and logged out of Tanya's cloud. 30 seconds of work that felt like 30 minutes. When Kyle came out of the bathroom, I was in bed. Eyes closed. Covers pulled up. Heart rate somewhere around 120. He walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. Stopped at my door. I felt his shadow in the doorframe, felt it the way you feel someone watching you in a dark room. 3 seconds. I counted. Then he walked away. The couch springs creaked. His phone screen glowed blue in the dark. Within minutes, he was asleep. I lay there for an hour, breathing, counting the heartbeats as they slowed from 120 to 90 to something that almost resembled calm. He hadn't seen anything. He didn't suspect anything. But 3 seconds in a doorframe is a long time when your entire future depends on a man not looking too closely at the woman he's already decided is invisible. The next morning, Sunday, I drove to the FedEx on Capitol Boulevard and shipped the final set of documents to Greenville. USB backup, printed spreadsheets, annotated timeline, insured, signature required. I paid $11.40 for the shipping and thought about how strange it is that the most important package of your life costs less than a mediocre lunch. Walter signed for it that afternoon. You got it. Got it. Anything else? Not yet. Okay. 14 seconds again. Our calls were getting shorter as the stakes got higher. Fewer words, more weight. Like the conversations were being compressed under pressure until only the essential molecules remained. On Tuesday, I met Gail Lindstrom, the divorce attorney, at her office on Six Forks Road. Gail was 55, silver-streaked hair cut short and practical, and she had the energy of a woman who'd seen 400 marriages end and had run out of patience for the reasons. She reviewed the marital finances, or what Kyle had disclosed, which was the clean version of everything. The version that showed a moderately successful bar, a leased truck, some cash in a business account. The version where the numbers added up to a life that was modest but functional. Based on equitable distribution, Gail said, tapping her pen on the desk, you'd be entitled to roughly half of all marital assets. Even if the business is in his name, your contributions, financial and otherwise, give you a strong claim. I'd estimate your share at $150,000 to $200,000 depending on valuation. I don't want it. Gail's pen stopped tapping. Excuse me. I want to relinquish all claims. He keeps everything. I walk away with what's in my name. She stared at me the way people stare at someone who's just volunteered to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Sloan, what's in your name is a used car and a checking account with $3,000. I know. You're telling me you want to walk away from a 5-year marriage with less than you had when you were 25. I'm walking away clean, Gail. That's everything. She looked at me for a long time, trying to figure out if I was depressed or stupid or being coerced. I was none of those things, but I couldn't tell her what I was because Gail didn't know about Priya, Didn't know about the DEA, didn't know that the assets she wanted me to fight for were soaked in cocaine money and would be seized by the federal government within weeks of landing in Kyle's lap. "I'll draft the agreement," she said finally. The words came out like she was chewing on something bitter. "But I want you to know that in 22 years of practice, I have never had a client voluntarily walk away from this much." "I appreciate that, Gail. Do you want me to note my objection in the file, if it makes you feel better?" It didn't. I could tell. But she drafted it anyway because that's what good lawyers do. They follow the client's instructions even when the instructions make no sense. Especially when the instructions make no sense. Gail looked at me like I'd lost my mind. My own divorce lawyer thought I was broken. Kyle thought I was weak. Tanya called me the accountant, like it was something to wipe off her shoe. In 2 weeks, a judge would finalize the terms, and every person in that courtroom would see a woman who'd given up everything without a fight. Everyone except the 2 DEA agents who'd already opened a case file with my name on the first page, not as a suspect, but as a cooperating witness. Chapter 7. I should have known Kyle wouldn't go quietly. Not because he suspected anything he didn't, but because men like Kyle don't just take what they want. They make sure you know you've lost. The week before the hearing, he started bringing Tanya to our apartment. Not to stay, just to visit. Just to sit on the couch I'd bought at Goodwill and drink wine from glasses I'd unpacked when we moved in, and laugh at things on her phone while I was in the next room. He'd leave the bedroom door open so I could hear them. So I could hear her voice in my kitchen, my living room, my space the same way she'd already taken my husband, my necklace, my car money, my future. The first time I stayed in the bedroom and stared at the ceiling and listened to Tanya ask where the bottle opener was. My bottle opener. The one my sister gave me as a housewarming gift. The second time Tanya knocked on my bedroom door. Knocked. Like she was being polite. Like she was a guest in a hotel and I was the housekeeper. "Hey, do you have any sparkling water? Kyle said you might." I looked at her through the 4-inch gap in the door. 29 years old, perfect nails. The David Yurman pendant resting against her collarbone. She smiled at me the way you smile at someone who works at a store you'll never shop at again. "Under the sink," I said. "Thanks, babe." Babe. She called me babe, in my apartment. While wearing jewelry my husband bought with drug money. I closed the door and stood behind it for a full minute, hands flat against the wood, breathing through my nose. 12 more days. That's all I needed. But it wasn't Tanya or Kyle who nearly broke my plan. It was Marcus. He showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 o'clock. Kyle was at the bar. I was alone. The knock was polite. 3 measured taps, the kind a salesman gives. I looked through the peephole and saw a face I'd only seen in photos and across crowded rooms. Marcus Hale. 40 years old, clean-shaven, wearing a linen shirt like he'd just walked off a boat, smiling the way people smile when they want you to forget they're dangerous. I opened the door because not opening it would have been worse. A woman who has nothing to hide opens her door. "Sloan." He said my name like we were old friends. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Marcus. Kyle's not here." "I know. I came to talk to you." He didn't ask to come in. Just stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, casual, relaxed, taking up space the way men do when they want you to understand that the space is already theirs. "Kyle tells me the divorce is almost wrapped up. That's good. Clean break." He glanced past me into the apartment, a quick scan, the kind that registers everything and pretends to notice nothing. "Funny, Kyle said you were keeping things simple. Smart." "I just want it done," I said. "Sure, sure." He nodded like I'd said something wise. Then his voice dropped. Not quieter, just lower. The register you use when you want someone to feel the weight of what you're saying. "I hope you're planning on keeping things simple with everything else too, Sloan. Some businesses, they work best when nobody asks too many questions. The partners are happy. The employees are happy. Everybody eats." He smiled again. You understand? The smile didn't reach his eyes. It stopped at his cheekbones and stayed there like a mask that fit almost right, but not quite. I don't care about the bar, Marcus. I never did. Good girl. He tapped the doorframe twice with his knuckle, a little rhythm almost friendly. Take care of yourself, Sloane. He walked down the hallway, unhurried, didn't look back. I closed the door, locked it, put the chain on, stood with my back against it and felt my heartbeat in my teeth. Good girl. Like I was a dog that had learned to stay. I called Priya from the bathroom with the fan running and the shower on, not because I thought my apartment was bugged, but because paranoia is a reasonable response when a drug distributor has just told you to keep things simple. Marcus came to my apartment. Priya's voice sharpened. When? 20 minutes ago, he was polite. What did he say? Some businesses work best when nobody asks too many questions, and he called me good girl. Silence for 3 seconds. Did he threaten you directly? Explicit language? No, he was smiling the whole time. That's worse. Yes, Priya said. It is. I heard her chair creak, heard papers moving. This changes the urgency. If Marcus is feeling you out, it means he's cautious. Cautious men pay attention to details. We need the divorce finalized before anything else moves. Once Kyle's name is on everything and your name is on nothing, the tip becomes actionable without exposing you as the source. How fast can DEA move? I'll call the case agent today. They've been running surveillance on Neon for 2 weeks, they told me that much. But they need the financial separation clean before they execute warrants. If they move while you're still legally tied to those assets, defense attorneys will argue you had motive to fabricate. The divorce has to come first. The hearing is in 11 days. Then we wait 11 days. Can you do that? I thought about Marcus in my hallway, the tap on the doorframe, the smile that stopped at his cheekbones. I can do it. One more thing. Do you have somewhere safe to go? Not your apartment. My parents are in Greenville. Call them. I called my father at 6 that evening. He picked up on the first ring, which meant Nadia had already called him, which meant my sister's crisis radar was as good as ever. Dad, I need you in Raleigh. When? Thursday? The hearing was the following Thursday. Bring Mom. We'll be there Wednesday night. He didn't ask why. Didn't ask what had changed. Didn't ask if he should bring the toolbox or something else entirely. Just, we'll be there Wednesday night. Spoken the way he says everything like the words were load-tested before he let them out. The last week was the longest of my life. Every day, the same routine wake-up coffee, pretend to be broken, wait for Kyle to leave, document one more transaction, encrypt, save, breathe. Kyle was busier than usual. Finalizing things at the bar, he said, making sure the transition was smooth. He probably meant the transition from married drug dealer to single drug dealer, but I didn't ask. 3 days before the hearing, Kyle sat me down for what he called a final conversation. He had a new folder thinner than the first one, a single page inside. His proposed settlement. I could keep the Civic, my personal belongings, and $2,500 in cash. Kyle would retain the bar, the truck, all accounts. All LLC shares the furniture, and the $4,000 sound system he'd bought for the apartment that we both knew was really for impressing Tanya when she visited. He slid the paper across the table. I added something. $5,000 for you to get set up somewhere. Fresh start money? $5,000. My condo had been worth $185,000. My mother's contribution was $120,000. My car had been worth $22,000. $327,000 poured into this marriage, and he was offering me $5,000 to go away. No hard feelings, right? Kyle said. I looked at him. 5 years. My home, my car, my mother's savings. His girlfriend in my kitchen, his business partner in my hallway, his baby in another woman's body, and every dollar of it running on a machine that would put him in a concrete room for the next decade. No hard feelings, Kyle. And I meant it. Not because I'd forgiven him, because feelings hard or soft or anything in between were a luxury I'd traded in for something more useful. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. This isn't over. Not even close. Thursday morning, courtroom 3A. I wore the navy dress I'd bought at Target for $34. Kyle wore a Tom Ford shirt, $400 charged to the business account. His lawyer shuffled papers. My lawyer looked at me like she was watching someone walk into traffic on purpose. Outside in the parking lot, my father sat in his truck. Engine off, windows down, waiting. He wasn't the only one. The courtroom smelled like old wood and new paper. Fluorescent lights hummed above oak benches that had seen 3 decades of marriages dissolve into signatures and silence. Courtroom 3, A. Wake County Courthouse. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I arrived at 8:50. Navy dress. No jewelry. Hair pulled back. I looked like a woman who'd been sleeping badly and eating worse, which was half performance and half truth. Gail Lindstrom walked beside me, briefcase in one hand, the other resting briefly on my arm the way you steady someone you think might collapse. Kyle was already seated. Tom Ford shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms, the new watch catching the light every time he moved his wrist. He looked rested, confident. Tanned in a way that suggested he'd been spending his Saturdays somewhere other than a leaking apartment. His lawyer, a man named Doug Pittman, mid-40s, competent, perfectly adequate for a divorce he thought was uncontested, sat beside him, reviewing documents with the mild attention of someone who expects no surprises. I sat down. Gail opened her briefcase. I folded my hands on the table and stared at a point on the wall just above the judge's bench and breathed. Somewhere in this building, in a hallway or a parking lot, or a car with tinted windows, 2 DEA agents were waiting for a phone call from Priya Shah. The call would come when the divorce was final, when Kyle's name was on everything and mine was on nothing. When the last legal thread connecting me to Neon and Marcus Hale and the money that had once been my mother's was cut clean. I just had to sit here and sign paper for the next 40 minutes. Judge Martin Cole entered. Early 60s, reading glasses, gray suit under his robe. The courtroom rose. He sat. We sat. He opened the file. Merritt versus Merritt, final dissolution hearing. He scanned the first page. I understand the parties have reached an agreement regarding the division of marital property. Doug Pittman stood. That's correct, Your Honor. My client, Kyle Merritt, will retain all marital assets, including the business known as Neon Bar and Lounge, the associated LLC interests, all business accounts, the marital vehicle, and personal property, as itemized in Exhibit A. Gail rose beside me. I felt her hesitation, a half-second pause, the kind only another woman would notice. She still thought this was a mistake. She still thought I was broken. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to marital property, Gail said. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. Ms. Merritt will retain her personal vehicle and personal belongings as listed. The respondent has agreed to a cash settlement of $2,500. $2,500. I heard Gail swallow the number like it was a bone. Judge Cole looked at me over his glasses. The look judges give when they want to make sure no one is being coerced into something catastrophic. Ms. Merritt, I need to be certain you understand the terms you're agreeing to today. You are relinquishing your claim to all shared marital property, including a business you contributed to financially. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you're entering this agreement voluntarily. No one is pressuring you into these terms. No, Your Honor. This is my choice. He studied me for a moment. I kept my face still. Tired, resigned. The face of a woman who just wanted it over. The face I'd been wearing for 3 months like a second skin. Are you satisfied that the settlement is fair? I don't want any of it, Your Honor. I paused. Let the words land. I just want to move on. Judge Cole watched me for another long second. I could feel his calculation, the mental math of a family court judge trying to decide if the woman in front of him was making a terrible decision or simply a decision he didn't understand. But I was represented. I was coherent. I was answering clearly. Very well. Let's proceed with the signing. The clerk distributed the documents, page after page, asset schedule, liability acknowledgement, settlement terms, signature lines marked with yellow tabs. Kyle signed fast, pen moving pages, flipping, barely reading. He wanted this done. He wanted to walk out of this courtroom and into his new life with Tanya and the baby, and the bar, and the money, and the whole beautiful lie he'd built on the back of everything I'd given him. Each signature was a little flourish, confident, careless, the handwriting of a man who'd never read a document all the way through in his life. I signed slowly, every page, every line. My handwriting small and precise, the way I used to initial ledger pages at the bank. Each signature a release, not just of property, of the woman who'd believed in napkin dreams and burnt scrambled eggs, and a man who said trying was enough. Kyle glanced at his lawyer and smiled. Doug nodded back. Across the room, I felt the energy shift, the quiet satisfaction of a team that thinks the game is over. Judge Cole reviewed the final pages, flipped to the last signature, checked both. The agreement is executed. The marriage of Kyle Merritt and Sloan Merritt is hereby dissolved. Mr. Merritt receives all marital assets as itemized. Ms. Merritt receives personal property and the agreed settlement. The gavel came down. A small wooden sound. The period at the end of a 5-year sentence. Kyle exhaled. I could hear it from across the room, the breath of a man who'd been holding something in and finally let it go. He leaned over to Doug, said something quiet, and they both almost smiled, almost laughed. The relief of it, the ease. He'd walked in expecting a fight and found a surrender. I stood up, picked up my purse, a canvas bag from Target, $12, bought the same day as the dress, pushed my chair in. Gail was gathering her papers, her mouth set in a line that said she'd be writing a very detailed memo about this for her file. Then I turned to Kyle. He was still half-seated, one hand on the table, looking up at me with an expression I'd seen before, the look he gave waitresses and bartenders and people he considered beneath his attention. Generous. Pitying. Done. Kyle. He straightened slightly, waiting for whatever defeated goodbye I was going to offer. A thank you, maybe. A last soft word from the woman who'd never fought back. You got the bar, the truck, the accounts. Every dollar Marcus ever washed through that register. Every deposit Tanya split under $10,000 to keep the feds from noticing. All of it. It's yours now. Every cent. The courtroom went very quiet. Kyle's face didn't change all at once. It changed in layers, like watching water freeze the surface, going still before the cold reaches the bottom. First his smile faded. Then his eyes shifted not to me, but inward to some calculation happening behind them that he couldn't stop and couldn't finish. Then his mouth opened just slightly and no sound came out. I don't want it, I said. I never did. I just needed it in your name. Doug Pittman looked up from his papers. Gail stopped moving. Judge Cole, halfway through closing the file, paused. Kyle's hand was still on the table. I watched his fingers curl slowly the way a leaf curls in heat until his knuckles were white against the wood. His jaw worked once. Twice. What did you... I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward the door. My flats made no sound on the courtroom floor. Behind me, I heard Kyle's chair push back. Heard Doug say something low and urgent. Heard Gail close her briefcase with a snap that sounded in that silent room like a period at the end of a paragraph she'd finally read to the bottom of. The courtroom door was heavy. I pushed it open with one hand and stepped into the hallway. The light was different out here, brighter, cleaner, the kind of light that exists on the other side of something you've walked through. I didn't run, didn't hurry. Walked past the water fountain and the bulletin board with its pinned notices, and the bench where an old man sat waiting for his own case to be called. Pushed through the glass doors at the end of the hall and stepped outside into April. The sun was warm. The parking lot was half full. Birds were doing something in a tree by the entrance, ordinary, uninterested in the fact that a woman had just ended her marriage and started a detonation sequence in the same 15 minutes. Two men stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, not together, spaced apart, one on each side like bookends. Dark jackets, conservative shoes, the posture of people who stand for a living and have learned to do it without looking like they're waiting for anything. I walked between them, down the steps, across the sidewalk. I didn't look at them and they didn't look at me. We had an understanding, the three of us. An understanding built on 47 pages of spreadsheets and a tip filed through a lawyer's encrypted channel and 3 months of surveillance on a bar called Neon. My father's truck was parked in the third row. Silver Chevy, Silverado, 14 years old. Merit Auto Repair magnet still on the door from when he'd forgotten to take it off before the drive-up. Walter stood leaning against the driver's side, arms crossed, watching the courthouse entrance the way he watches everything, quietly, completely missing nothing. My mother sat in the passenger seat, window down, hands in her lap. I walked to the truck. My father watched me come. He didn't speak. He looked over my shoulder at the courthouse doors behind me, and I knew he could see what was about to happen even if he couldn't hear it yet. Behind me, the glass doors opened again. I heard Kyle's voice before I heard his footsteps, fast rising, the voice of a man who's just realized the floor is gone. Then, a different voice. Calm. Official. Mr. Merritt, DEA. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. Please keep your hands where we can see them. I didn't turn around. I heard it all, the questions, the protests, the sharp metallic sound of something I chose not to identify, but I didn't turn around. I opened the passenger side rear door of my father's truck and sat down and closed the door and looked straight ahead at the dashboard and the air freshener hanging from the mirror, pine-scented, the kind my father has bought from the same gas station for 20 years. Jean reached back between the seats and took my hand. Her grip was tight. Her fingers were cold. Walter got in, started the engine, pulled out of the parking space. At the exit of the parking lot, he slowed and looked in the rearview mirror. I don't know what he saw. I didn't ask. He turned onto the road and pointed the truck south toward Greenville. 3 minutes of silence. The highway entrance ramp. The merge. The open road. My mother's voice, small and steady. Is it over? I looked out the window. Raleigh sliding past the skyline, the billboards. The exit signs for places I'd lived and lost and left behind. The road to Greenville stretched out in front of us, 4 hours of interstate and pine trees, and nothing I needed to be afraid of anymore. He wanted everything, Mom. I gave him exactly what he asked for. Jean squeezed my hand tighter. Walter drove. His eyes stayed on the road. But I saw it, the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Something closer to a breath he'd been holding for 5 years, finally leaving his body. The truck smelled like motor oil and pine air freshener and my mother's Jean Naté perfume. The Civic was still at my apartment in Raleigh. I'd go back for it later. Right now, I was riding home in my father's truck, holding my mother's hand, watching the mile markers count down toward the only place that had never asked me to sell anything to prove I belonged. Chapter 9. Kyle Merritt was arrested on the steps of Wake County Courthouse at 9:47 on a Thursday morning in April. He was wearing a $400 Tom Ford shirt and the watch he'd bought to celebrate a divorce he thought he'd won. By the time they processed him at the Wake County Detention Center, the watch was in a plastic bag with his wallet and his belt, and the phone that still had Tanya's name on the lock screen. By Friday afternoon, his mugshot was on every local news site in the Triangle. Channel 5 ran it at 6 o'clock. Raleigh bar owner, arrested in federal drug and money laundering probe. The photo they used was from the Rotary Club website, the one where Kyle was shaking hands with a city councilman at a charity golf tournament. They put it next to the mugshot. The contrast did all the work the anchor's script didn't need to. Marcus Hale was arrested the same day. DEA executed simultaneous warrants. Neon at 10:15, Marcus's 2 Charlotte bars by noon. Agents found what they expected because Priya had told them exactly where to look. And Priya knew because I'd mapped every dollar, every deposit, every coded entry in Tanya's spreadsheets for 3 months until the picture was so clear you could have framed it. Marcus's bars had been running the same play for longer than Neon structured deposits. Inflated cash revenue supplier payments routed through shell accounts. The Charlotte operation was bigger than Raleigh. More product. More people. More years of thinking nobody was watching. Marcus posted bail within 48 hours, $750,000 secured against one of his Charlotte properties. He walked out of the detention center in a suit his lawyer brought him and didn't say a word to the reporters outside. Kyle didn't post bail. His was set at $500,000 and every asset that could have secured it was frozen. The bar, the truck, the business accounts, the LLC shares. Everything he'd signed for in that courtroom 12 hours earlier was now evidence in a federal investigation. The man who'd demanded everything in the divorce now owned nothing he could touch. Tanya was arrested at 4 in the afternoon at the apartment Kyle had leased for her on South Wilmington Street. She was home. She'd been calling Kyle's phone for 6 hours. It went straight to voicemail each time because Kyle's phone was in a plastic bag in a processing room, and Kyle was sitting in an interview room explaining to 2 agents that this was all a big misunderstanding and he was just a bar owner, and he didn't know anything about anything. The agents at Tanya's apartment found the second set of books on her personal laptop. They found records on a thumb drive in her nightstand drawer. They found $11,000 in cash in a shoebox in the closet just over the reporting threshold, which suggested Tanya had stopped being careful with her own rules. And in the bathroom cabinet next to the prenatal vitamins, they found a burner phone with text threads to 3 numbers that matched the supplier contacts in her spreadsheets. Tanya Voss was charged with conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance and money laundering. She cried when they put the cuffs on. I know because it was in the arrest report that Priya obtained later. Subject became emotional during processing. Emotional. The woman who'd sat on my husband's desk and worn my necklace and called me babe in my own kitchen became emotional when the consequences arrived. The Audi was seized from the apartment parking lot. A federal agent drove it away on a flatbed. I didn't see it happen, but I pictured it, the white Q5 strapped down and hauled off like a repo, Tanya's blessed bumper sticker catching the light one last time. Somewhere on Instagram, the photo of that car was still getting likes from people who didn't know yet. Within 72 hours, Tanya's lawyer contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office. Plea deal, full cooperation. Tanya would testify against Kyle and Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months, federal plus 3 years probation, with the pregnancy factored into sentencing recommendations. She gave them everything. Dates, names, amounts, the supply chain from source to distribution. The coded language in the spreadsheet's house wine meant cocaine private event supplies, meant bulk orders, consulting payments, meant exactly what the DEA already suspected. She gave them 4 years of operation mapped in the handwriting of a woman who'd kept meticulous records, because she'd always known somewhere in the back of her mind that she might need to trade them for her freedom someday. Tanya was a survivor. I'll give her that. She kept those records the same way I kept mine, carefully, methodically, in triplicate. The difference was that she kept them as insurance against the man she was sleeping with. I kept mine as evidence against the man I was married to. Same skill, different reasons. Both effective. When Kyle's lawyer informed him that Tanya had flipped the conversation, as Priya later described it from court filings, went like this: Kyle, she can't do that. She's carrying my kid. Lawyer: Mr. Merritt, the mother of your child, has provided federal investigators with 4 years of detailed financial records documenting your involvement in drug distribution and money laundering. Her cooperation is not something we can prevent. Kyle: Tell her I'll take care of everything. His lawyer looked at him across a metal table in a concrete room where the lights buzzed and the chair was bolted to the floor. Mr. Merritt, taking care of everything, is exactly why you're sitting in this room. Kyle then turned on Marcus, told his lawyer he'd been coerced. Marcus had brought him into the business. Marcus controlled the supply chain. Marcus made the connections. Kyle was just the front. Just the name on the lease. Just a bartender with big dreams who got in over his head. Marcus's lawyer filed a response within the week. Marcus was merely an investor, a silent partner. He provided startup capital and business advice. Kyle ran the operation. Kyle managed the cash. Kyle hired Tanya. Kyle made the deposits. Kyle signed the leases. Marcus had documentation, emails, texts, a paper trail showing that Kyle had been the operational lead from day one. 2 men pointing at each other across a federal investigation, each one holding the evidence that buried the other. The DEA didn't need to choose sides. They had Tanya's records, my spreadsheet, surveillance footage, bank records, and 2 defendants racing each other to the bottom. The truck Kyle had demanded in the divorce was found at Neon's parking lot and seized. A federal sticker on the windshield. Property seized by U.S. Department of Justice. The same truck he'd driven to court that Thursday morning, the one he'd parked with confidence in the courthouse lot, while he signed papers to take everything from me. Now it sat behind yellow tape in an empty parking lot next to a bar with a neon sign that would never light up again. The community response followed the pattern it always follows. First shock. I can't believe it, he seemed like such a nice guy. Then distance, the phone calls that stopped coming, the golf buddies who were suddenly busy, the Rotary Club removing his name from the member directory. Then revision. I always thought something was off about that place, from people who had been drinking there every Friday for 2 years. Kyle's mother called once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail I listened to once and deleted. Her voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a woman who'd just learned her son was not the person she'd been bragging about at Sunday dinner for 3 years. She didn't apologize. She asked if I could explain what happened. Like I was still Kyle's wife. Like explaining Kyle was still my job. Diane Childress, a woman from book club who'd gushed over Kyle at every gathering, who'd told me once that I was so lucky to have a man with that kind of ambition, posted on Facebook. Just goes to show you never really know people. She tagged the news article. 14 likes, 3 comments. The digital equivalent of shaking your head while doing absolutely nothing. And then there was the quiet part. The part that didn't make the news. 3 weeks after the arrest, Priya called me on a Wednesday evening. I was at my parents' house in Greenville, sitting on the back porch watching fireflies blink in the yard my father had mowed every Saturday for 30 years. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants to meet with you formally, not as a suspect, as a cooperating witness. They want the full timeline when you discovered the activity, what steps you took, how you preserved the evidence. She paused. They're also going to ask about the $120,000 your mother contributed. I watched a firefly land on the porch railing. Glow, dark, glow, dark. Tell them I'll be there. Sloan, this is good. Your cooperation combined with Tanya's testimony and the financial records gives them an airtight case. Kyle's looking at 7 to 10 years federal. Marcus, 12 to 15. You did this by the book. Every step. I did it by the spreadsheet, I said. Close enough. Priya laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh in 4 months of knowing her. It sounded like relief. One more thing. As a cooperating witness and a financial victim, your mother's contribution was used without her knowledge to fund illegal activity. There's a process for victim recovery through asset forfeiture. I can't promise the full amount, but the precedent is strong. My mother's money. $120,000 she'd hidden from my father to help her daughter's husband chase a dream that turned out to be a nightmare. There was a path to bringing it home. I went inside and found my mother in the kitchen. She was washing dishes the way she always washes dishes, slowly, methodically, staring out the window at something nobody else can see. I stood next to her and picked up a towel and started drying. Mom, the lawyers think they can get your money back. Not right away, but eventually. Her hands stopped moving in the water. She didn't look at me. I'm sorry I ever gave it to him, she said quietly. Your father was right. Dad's always right. Don't tell him I said that. She laughed. A small, wet laugh. Then she handed me a plate and we stood there together in the kitchen, washing and drying, not saying anything else. The window above the sink looked out onto the backyard where my father was covering the grill. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he does everything. He didn't know yet about the recovery process. I'd tell him later. Or my mother would. Or nobody would, and the money would just appear in their account one day, and Walter Merritt would look at his wife and nod once, and that would be the entire conversation. Some families heal with long talks and therapy sessions and tears. Mine heals with 14-second phone calls and dishes washed in silence, and a man who says no when he means, I love you too much to watch you get hurt. My father's house smells like motor oil, and Jean Naté perfume the same way it smelled since I was 6 years old. Some things don't change. Some things shouldn't. 6 months after the divorce, I moved into a small house on Laurel Creek Road, 11 minutes from my parents, 8 minutes from Nadia's school. A foreclosure my father found at auction, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and a kitchen with cabinets that needed sanding and walls that needed everything. $127,000. I paid with savings, and the first installment of my mother's recovered funds, $78,000, returned through the asset forfeiture process, with the remainder expected within the year. Priya had been right. The precedent was strong. The money was coming home. Walter drove up from his shop the first Saturday with a truckload of supplies. Sandpaper, primer, rollers, drop cloths, 2 gallons of paint I hadn't picked yet, and a 6-pack of cheerwine, because my father believes no house project should begin without regional soda. What color for the kitchen? He asked, prying open a paint can with a flathead screwdriver. Sage green. He looked at the swatch I'd pulled from my purse, looked at the bare kitchen walls, looked at me. Your mother's going to want to do the trim. I know. She's going to take 3 hours picking the white. I know that too. We painted all day. My father did the ceiling because he said my roller technique would leave streaks, which was his way of saying he wanted to help without saying he wanted to help. I did the walls. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The room filled slowly with color, 1 stroke at a time, and by evening the kitchen was sage green and the windows were open and the whole house smelled like paint and possibility and cheerwine. I started a bookkeeping service out of the 2nd bedroom, Merritt accounting my name on the door. My hours, my rules, small businesses mostly, a hair salon on Main Street, a landscaping company, a woman who made custom cakes and had been tracking her finances in a spiral notebook for 4 years. My father was my first client. He brought me a shoebox of receipts from the shop and set it on my desk like a man surrendering evidence. You're charging your own father. Family discount, 10% off. That's highway robbery. You want 15? I can do 15. I'll take the 10. He paid on time every month. First of the month check in an envelope, my name written in the same handwriting that had signed the $65,000 check for my condo 8 years ago. He never once mentioned that the condo was gone. Never once said I told you so. Never once brought up Kyle's name except the one time I heard him on the phone with a buddy from the shop. My daughter's an accountant now. Got her own business. A pause. Yeah, she's good with numbers. Always was. Kyle pleaded guilty in September. Conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance, money laundering, structuring financial transactions to evade reporting. 7 to 10 years federal. His sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday. I didn't go. Priya sent me a text that evening. 7 years. No parole eligibility for 85%. I read it once. Set the phone down. Made dinner. Marcus got 12. His Charlotte operation was bigger, older, uglier. The prosecutor used the word enterprise 11 times in closing arguments. Tanya served 14 months at a minimum security facility in Alderson, West Virginia. She had the baby in custody, a boy 6 pounds 9 ounces born in a hospital room with a federal marshal in the hallway. I don't know what she named him. I didn't ask. The Audi was sold at federal auction. $31,000. Neon's lease was terminated. The building sat empty for 2 months before a woman bought it and turned it into a yoga studio. The neon sign came down. The velvet rope went to Goodwill. The VIP section became a meditation room. Karma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in Downward Dog. A letter arrived at my parents' house in November, forwarded from Raleigh. Kyle's handwriting on the envelope. I set it on my kitchen counter, the sage green kitchen in the house I owned on the street, 11 minutes from my parents. I looked at it for 3 days. Thought about opening it. Thought about what a man writes from a federal facility to the woman he threw away. I put it in the trash on a Thursday morning under the coffee grounds and an empty cheerwine can. Some envelopes don't need opening. Some sentences don't need finishing. On a Sunday evening in late October, I sat on my parents' back porch while my father grilled steaks on the Weber he'd owned since before I was born. The grates were seasoned with 25 years of cookouts, and he refused to replace them because he said the flavor was in the rust. My mother was inside making her potato salad, the recipe she won't share with anyone, not even Nadia, not even me, because she says it's her retirement insurance. The air smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and the last warm day before fall settled in for real. Fireflies were starting up in the yard. My father flipped a steak and looked over at me. You know why I said no when he asked for the money? Because you're smart. Walter turned the steak, pressed it once with the spatula, watched the juice run. No, because I knew my daughter deserved better than that man. I was just waiting for her to see it herself. I didn't say anything. Sat there on the porch step and listened to the steak sizzle and my mother hum something in the kitchen and the crickets start their evening shift in the grass. 5 years ago, I sat in a Waffle House at 1 in the morning and watched a man draw his dreams on a napkin and thought, this is my future. Now I sat on my father's porch smelling charcoal and Jean Naté, listening to the people who'd never asked me to sell a single thing to prove I love them. And I thought, no. This is. People ask me if I regret not taking the money, the settlement, the assets, anything. I gave up every dollar connected to that marriage and I'd do it again tomorrow. Some money costs more than it's worth. Some things you carry change the shape of your hands until you can't hold anything clean. But here's what I still think about late at night when the house is quiet and the porch light attracts moths, and the only sound is crickets and the settling of a home that's mine. Should I have told Kyle what I knew, given him a chance to stop? A chance to turn himself in and face it on his own terms, or was letting him choose his own greed, letting him sign for every dollar and every lie, the only justice available to a woman whose family had already paid enough? I don't know. I go back and forth. Maybe you know better than I do. Tell me in the comments. And if this story found you at the right time, if you're sitting in a kitchen that doesn't feel like yours or driving a car someone else decided you deserved, or holding a secret that's heavier than anyone around you knows, subscribe. I've got more to tell, and some of it might sound familiar. The Civic is still parked in my driveway. Pulls to the left. A C takes 10 minutes. I washed it last Saturday in the sun barefoot on the concrete water from a garden hose my father installed the same weekend we painted the kitchen. I don't need a new car. I need the one nobody bought for me. The one nobody can take.